Ladies and gentlemen, we have on our show, The Community Connection, just a tremendous powerhouse guest, an architect, I think, of modern education and what it should be. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, John B. King Jr. What's going on, sir? How you doing, man?
I'm excited to talk with you all.
Man, I
I'm
tell you
glad.
what, like I'm a Lakers fan, but I gotta tell you, man, those Knicks, this might be their year, man. Spike Lee, it could be the year. I don't know. What do you
Really
think?
could be. I've been waiting my entire life. So I'm very excited. Brunson's just been amazing.
It's his year.
Mr. Clutch.
It's his year. And when we like like sometimes my heart's with the Celtics. So
Yes.
I mean, so I know you've got both like some affinities to Boston and New York. So, but you are still rooting for the Knicks, correct?
Oh, very much so. Yeah. Yes. I went,
Congratulations to them.
yes.
I thought the Celtics had a good shot to repeat, but here we are.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Congrats.
But the Knicks really were. They were built to compete with the Celtics, and they came ready.
Well, it's a win. No matter what happens, we're gonna just that's a win. It's a win for the Knickerbockers. So there you go. I love it. All right, man. Well, thank you very much, John, for joining us. Sincerely, your advocacy, your inspiration, and your new book. Oh, it's just crushing. We love it. We love it. Love it. Love it.
Thank you.
Just the vulnerability in the story and the leadership lessons that I think needs to be in the hands of every superintendent, every school board member, every teacher, every principal. Everyone needs a copy of your book just to remind us of the heart that needs to be in this. So thank you for joining us. We're going to talk about this book. We're going to talk about your journey, and yeah, we can't wait. Dr. Worcester, you want to start us off, my man?
Yeah, like Nathaniel said, just your voice just comes out so clearly throughout the book. It's great. Love it. Hope it's doing phenomenally well. It should. It's a great story, very inspiring, and it's a little bit heart-wrenching, a little bit of inspiration. Our first question for guests often is, "What's your origin story?" This whole book is your origin story, so we'll get into a little bit more details as we go through. But first, what just inspired you to write this book now?
It's funny about a book project, right? It feels so well matched to this moment. Hopefully, it's a source of some hope amidst a lot of darkness.
Yeah.
But it was a 5-year project. And
Mm.
so really what sparked the work on the book was a Washington Post article about my family's experience of getting to know the family that owned the property where my great-grandfather was enslaved. And
Mm.
that Washington Post article spurred a book agent to reach out to the journalist who wrote the article to ask if he wanted to do a book about the story. And he was working on a different book project and said, "No, I can't do it, but you should call John and see if he's interested."
Mm.
And that was the moment that sort of began this journey of thinking about, well, if I was going to do a book, what would I want to really say? And
Mm.
for me, uh, the opportunity to have a message that can reach lots of people, I wanted it to be about teachers and the impact that teachers have. And so that was really the genesis of the book.
So that's interesting that the Genesis became the ending of the book, because that's the
Mhm.
last chapter of the book.
Yeah,
Mm.
Interesting.
yeah,
I
yeah.
love it.
Because at the end of the day, as I thought about who I wanted to reach, I really wanted to reach the person who's thinking about becoming a teacher,
Yes.
first year teacher who is struggling with how hard first year teaching is.
Amen.
The young person who's in a difficult situation that maybe feels hopeless,
Mm.
helping that young person see that things can get better. And so that then drove the structure of the book. But I still wanted to share this story about our family history because I think um, it speaks to the importance of communicating across lines of difference and
Yep.
the work I think we need to do as a country.
Yeah.
No, I agree. You know, every you know every student has a story. Every teacher has a story. Every school leader has a story, and oftentimes, John, we don't take the time to listen. And I think if we did a little bit more of the opening our ears, closing our mouths a little bit, I think that's where empowerment comes from, is being able to see yourself and other people's story, because we're much more connected than we think. Don't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Empathy is really, I think, one of the core things that we should be developing in young people. And I
Yeah.
hope that educators think about empathy as a skill that we ought to cultivate. And some of that is through the social interactions in the classroom. Some of it's through academics. I always remember being with President Obama in a conversation he had with a group of young people about the keys to his success. And he told them two things. One, he learned in college he was never going to let anybody outwork him. That somebody might be smarter than he was, but he wasn't going to lose out to them because they worked harder. And the other thing he said to them, which was so powerful, was about empathy and the role that empathy plays in leadership. And he talked about how growing up in a multiracial family, living in different places around the country and the world, he had to really think about things from different perspectives. And then he talked about reading and how when you read, you get to inhabit the worldview, the perspective of the central character in a novel, or the subject of a biography, or the author of a memoir. And he talked about how that experience of seeing the world through someone else's eyes makes you a more understanding person. And for him, he felt like that was core to how he thought about leadership and what helped him become a leader. And that always stuck with me. It was such a clear articulation of how academic experiences in school can help foster the kind of empathy we want to cultivate.
Yes.
Well, John, that's amazing, because I'm trying to get my son upstairs to read 5 chapters of The Count of Monte Cristo, and I told him, like, boy, you better read this book. This is a good book, and he keeps on getting on that damn TikTok and Snapchat. So I might even call him down to say, hey, Dr. King
Yes.
says you better be reading The Count of Monte Cristo. All right,
That's
Alexander
right.
Dumas knows what's up. So I might go get him. So, okay, I want to just kind of parlay that just a little bit, because you just gave us just like 3 minutes of just wisdom. Like, we could just drop the mic right now and end the show right now. But one of the things that just I was so fascinated with, John, in your book, was the interplay between hard work and luck. And I think it was the great talent, the great poet of our generation, Pitbull, who said the harder he works, the luckier he gets. And it's always fascinated with me. Tell me about that, because you had to work very, very hard to get where you were and the opportunities that you had. But I love in the book how you're so gracious to acknowledge the agency that people gave you, and like and the people that advocated for you. So yes, hard work, but then also there's a little bit of timing and right place in the right time. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Look, I think one of the luckiest things in my life was that I had Alan Osterwile as my teacher in 4th, 5th, 6th grade. In that period after my mom passed when I was 8, October of 4th grade, I was in Mr. Osterwile's class. I was living with my dad. My dad was struggling with Alzheimer's. Home was incredibly difficult. And his classroom was a refuge. It was safe, engaging, compelling, interesting. And if not for that, I don't think I'd be alive today. I certainly wouldn't have had the career that I've had. I mean, it really, and so sometimes when people will ask me about, some of the difficult things that I endured as a kid, I feel like they're kind of leaning into this American mythology of the Horatio Alger story. And to me, I don't think I was special. I was lucky to be in Mr. Osterwile's class and to have other teachers and counselors who intervened in my life at the right moment. And because of their intervention, I was able to have the opportunities that I did. Now, of course, yes, did I work hard and did I take academics seriously? Sure. But even that was made possible by the luck of having these right folks intervene at the right moment.
John, so you mentioned them a lot in your book.
Yeah.
Talking about Miss D, Mr. Osterwile. I think you mentioned, I was watching your show in DC, that you caught up with him at one of the book tours.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah.
that's awesome.
And he was there for your inauguration as Secretary of Education,
Mhm.
right? So how have you just managed to keep in touch over the years?
Yeah.
And I would love to know also, like, what, for our educators out there, what can they do to become the Misty or Mr. Osterwile
Mm,
or somebody else?
mm. Well, that's a great question. So, you know, we have stayed a little bit in touch over the years, but I hadn't really connected with him until I was Commissioner of Education in New York, and Mr. Osterwild's husband, Ross, was a principal on Long Island and came to one of our workshops that we were doing at the state level around the Common Core at the time. And I was giving a talk, and I was talking about examples of teachers who'd done really rigorous work in their classroom around reading and writing. And I was giving the example of Mr. Osterwile having us read the New York Times every day, fourth, fifth, sixth grade, and of having us do productions of A Midsummer Night's Dream, you know, Shakespeare in elementary school,
Yep.
and Alice in Wonderland, where I was the Rose, big red felt petal.
It's a very important role. Very important role.
That's a
Very
showstopper.
important role.
And I was sharing that story, and so Ross and I connected through that, and then that got me reconnected with Mr. Osterwile, and we've stayed in much closer touch since then. And it's been so nice to have him interact with my kids. So you know, this was probably 10 plus years ago, but we went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art as a family with Mr. Osterwile and Ross, and just
Awesome.
watching him talk with my girls about the things at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, just the way he had done with us when we were on field trips in fourth, fifth, sixth grade. It was just an incredible experience. And he's phenomenal. You know, he's 80, and he's gone back to painting, which is something he did early in his life and had put aside during his teaching career. He's gone back to painting. He's been prolific. He just had an art show in Hudson. He's just a wonderful, wonderful guy. So it was wonderful to have him at the kickoff of the book tour. In terms of, you know, teachers becoming Mr. Osterwile or Miss D, I mean, I hope what I try to convey in the book is that having rigorous, engaging, interesting, well-planned lessons and content and figuring out the hook to get kids engaged, all hugely important, and building relationships and creating a space of emotional safety for kids, conveying the way Mr. Osterwile always did, such curiosity about what we were thinking. You know, he really wanted to know, what does this 9-year-old think about the Cold War, you know? And I think teachers who are able to make that kind of connection with students can be so impactful.
Yeah.
You know, but you don't want the relationships without the engaging, rigorous, interesting academic work. It's really how do you marry those two?
Yes.
And throughout my career, that's what I'm trying to support as a, you know, as a teacher, as a principal, as a system leader, as a policymaker.
But here's my question. This is more of a bigger concern, and actually a little bit of an equitable question too, that I got to throw at you. You were very lucky to have that teacher, right? I wonder if the kids across the hall, you feel me? If the kids across the hall missed out on that teacher because of placement. Like, I wonder if that team of, I used ninth, so it was a third grade, fourth, whatever it was working together and saying, this is the kind of experience we want for our students, not just my student. And when I'm going in, like, I see the power when leadership creates the ecosystem for teams to have shared experiences. So kids just aren't lucky that they're placed on someone's roster. Does that make sense? So I'm just worried, curious about that. Yeah.
Completely. Look, I think one of our challenges is how do we scale good practice? You know, because I think you're right. No matter how struggling the school, you can walk into a school, it is in a, challenging community. The school is chaotic, it's under-resourced, everything is going wrong in the school, but they'll still tell you, you go to Miss Brown's class,
Just crack the code.
magic is happening in there, right?
Mhm.
And I think we are not very good at figuring out how do we take what's happening in Miss Brown's class and
Replicate it.
scale it and replicate it. Yeah.
Yep.
Some of it, I think you're right, is what's the team environment we create? Are there opportunities for other teachers to spend time in Miss Brown's classroom? I think seeing great teachers is really powerful and something we under leverage in teacher preparation and teacher support. When I was a principal, I tried to create time for teachers to do co-planning, what the Japanese would call lesson study, where you collaborative planning, and then you observe each other, giving them the lesson, and then you polish the stone. You try to improve the lesson over time. Looking at student work together and talking about what you see, what insights you take away. We don't make a lot of time for that in our schools. We organize schools in the US, mostly teachers delivering their content, their work in the classroom, and then maybe time for some grading, but we don't necessarily build in a ton of time for collaboration and professional learning the way other countries do.
It's true.
And I think that's a missed opportunity for us to scale that
It is.
Brown,
Yes.
It is. I want every teacher to be the best teacher, and like going back to with my own kids, like, we've had sometimes we share some personal things on the show, like I want my kid, every teacher I want my kids to have for the 12 years plus to be the absolute best teacher they're ever going to have. I really wish that. I know it's a father pipe dream, but even if it's not necessarily because someone's going to have that first year teacher, someone's going to have a teacher who's going through challenges or whatever. But as a school leader, we want to be able to say, Mom and Dad, it doesn't matter which teacher you get. We've got a culture. We've got a team that's going to take care of your child. And that's the one thing that if I had a magic wand, that's what I would want.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's totally right. And one of the things I think that would help us in that is more of a residency model for teacher preparation, so that the first year teacher isn't thrown in with so little experience in the classroom. I remember when I was secretary visiting a residency program in Louisiana, and it was a school where there were some students were in the residency and some students had the regular, several weeks in the spring student teaching experience. And I remember one young teacher saying, it was his first year, and he said, I have such an advantage over the people who just did student teaching because of my residency. He said, my biggest advantage is that I knew what September and October are supposed to look like. He was an elementary school teacher. And, anyone who's taught elementary school knows the whole game is September, October, right? It's setting those routines, creating the norms, creating the relationships. So if you come in and you student teach in the spring, you're not really getting a sense of what it takes to create the classroom environment that you're going to have all year. And this young man was pointing out that because he did a residency, he saw an experienced, effective teacher create those routines and in the classroom. And so he started out with this foundation that his classmates who just did student teaching did not have.
Yeah, I love it. And
I would love to see us invest in that.
Well, Louisiana is crushing it, by the way. So keep going. Yep.
Yeah.
So, John, you touched on something I want to follow up a little bit on. I think our listeners would be refreshed to know that even you, a former Secretary of Education, felt overwhelmed and ill-prepared for the challenges of being a first-year teacher. I loved your reference to growing pains and your idea of how to do a parent conference based on what happened when the Seavers went in to talk about Mike, and they had these great stacks of papers. And I think a lot of people can relate to learning how to be an effective teacher from what they saw on TV. So besides watching Growing Pains, and what I know you mentioned the residency, which I agree with is a powerful tool. What else would you give to those just starting out in education?
You know, look, I think one of the reasons that first year teaching was so hard for me was that there are some really big things that were not part of our teacher training experience. You know, I decided to get a master's in teaching
Mm.
Because I didn't want to just kind of jump into the classroom. I chose not to do one of the programs where they put you right in. I wanted that year of study and preparation.
Yeah.
But when I got to my first year of teaching, there were some big gaps that I could see. We never talked about classroom management.
Mm.
You know, I was learning to be a high school social studies teacher. Maybe they assumed that that was something you came in knowing, but
Wow.
we didn't spend any time on that.
Yep, I believe it.
But turns out it matters a lot.
Yes, it
I
does.
was relying, so I relied on experiences I'd had as a summer camp counselor and so forth, but I didn't have real training around how to think about classroom norms,
Mm.
how to manage the classroom. Assessment. We never really talked about assessment. We did a lot of content,
Mhm.
you know, whether it was European history or a history of Latin America or African American history, a lot of content, but we hadn't talked about how do you make a good quiz? How do you help students write a 5-page paper? What guidance do you give them? What kind of feedback do you give on a draft?
Wow.
You know, how do you make a good rubric?
Wow.
We hadn't talked about those things.
And this was at Harvard.
This was at Columbia Teachers College.
Columbia,
Those
that's a
are
good
big-
school. That's a big
Those are
school.
Yeah.
humongous areas to not get instruction on.
Right. Now, you know, this is 30 years ago. So
Things haven't changed. I don't think things have.
I don't think they've changed, John. I don't think they've changed.
But you know, it was the practical things.
Yep.
Right? And the example around Growing Pains was around parents and parent-teacher conferences. We
Yep.
literally never talked about parents.
That's nuts.
Not once.
What an important component of success.
Exactly.
I want to just tag a little bit on the Phillips, the Andover story.
Mhm.
Is so interesting
Mhm.
because I grew up in the rural South. There were no charters, private schools, whatever like that. So that idea is very foreign to me.
Mhm.
And what resonated with me is about, you having this opportunity, and it's luck, right? Luck, opportunity and hard work to be able to go to this school, but it was such a different fit that you talk about. And then getting kicked out, but maybe it wasn't really kicking out. Maybe it was a blessing in disguise, but just sharing that story. I know you've talked a lot about it, but it's very interesting. So I don't know if you could just dig into a little bit of that.
Well, so part of the context is, I was with my father for 4 years as he got more and more sick. I took on more and more responsibility at home. And then when he passed, I decided to go live with my brother.
Mm.
And my brother was 24, I was 12. My
Mm.
brother, it was loving for
Mm.
him to take me in, but it was terrible. Like he
Mm.
just was not at a place in his life where he could be raising a 12-year-old.
Mm.
And so I went from this very difficult, chaotic situation with my father to what really was a very difficult, chaotic situation with my brother, where he was drinking and partying and just there was no stability. And I had a friend who'd gone from elementary school who'd gone to Groton through one of the scholarship programs like A Better Chance or Prep for Prep. Anyway, he was having a good experience. He told me about it. And I thought, okay, well, this is my solution to get out of the situation with my brother. I'm going to go to boarding school, and I always loved academics, so that'll be good. And he made it sound like a community that where I might find some stability that I did not have at home. And the thing about Andover, the academics were great. But at that time, again, this is, now 35 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And maybe it's changed, but there were not a lot of students of color. I felt as a Black Puerto Rican kid from Brooklyn, very out of place.
Mm,
There were not a lot of supports for kids who were struggling socio-emotionally.
mm,
Like I did well in my classes,
yeah.
but I was a mess. I'd never really worked through the things I'd gone through, losing my
Mhm.
mom, living with my dad who
No counseling
struggled.
support, no social workers,
No,
no age, no advocacy
no,
for that type of work. No.
no. And there may have been,
Mm,
but nobody directed me there.
sure.
Yeah.
And so like I was, and also I was like many adolescents who've been through trauma, very angry at adults, very distrustful of adults. And so they didn't really have a strategy for me. And I broke all the rules.
Mm,
And look, I've been on my own since I was 8,
yeah.
so I didn't feel like anybody should be telling me
Yeah.
what to do. And it really was a bad, it was a bad match.
Mm,
And what I needed was a different kind of structure with infused with love, which was not my experience of Andover.
mm,
And so when I got kicked out, I went to live with my aunt and uncle, and their home, my uncle was career Air Force,
mm,
Tuskegee
mhm,
Airman.
mhm.
They ran a tight ship. Dinner was at the same
Mhm.
time every
That's
night.
right. That's right.
But it was structure with love, and that helped me get back on track.
Mm. I love that story. And when I was reading it, John, it like so much of my mind is going through, and I don't want to jump ahead too much, Dr. Worcester, but so my brain works. But like those types of private schools
Mm-hmm.
are the ones that are so in vogue right now about
Mm-hmm.
with vouchers and doing those types of things. And like on one side, I understand that like there may be students in really struggling communities, right? And the parents and the family absolutely feel like that, the school that they have is not the best option. And so if they had an option to go to something like that, a school, that it would be warm welcome and it would be perfectly suited and everything would be perfect, but it may not be, and so
That's
like
right.
so
That's right.
and you're one of the rare leaders that we've had in our country representing that's actually had so many different experiences. I mean, that should have been your qualification. This guy got kicked out of school, he's our guy. I mean, that should have
Yeah,
been,
yeah.
Harvard like five that rolls down, but kicked out of a private boarding school, that's my man. So like, I know we're jumping ahead a little bit. Like, how do you just speak a little bit, John, to that intersection of private, public,
Mm.
different charter schools still having an equitable, because I believe true equity lies in our public schools, and I don't think it's there yet.
Yes,
And
that's
I
right.
I got to be honest with you, I want the public schools to be the best option for our kids. I
That's right.
I want to be the best option. But we're not there yet. So I mean, no one is more qualified to speak on this, John, than you.
Yeah. Look, I agree with you completely that really the hope for our democracy rests in public education. And I've committed my career to public education because I believe it is so foundational uh, to our economy, to our national security, and to the kinds of habits of citizenship that are going to
Mm,
help us preserve our democracy. And the way I think about charters is as a different type of public school, with a
mm,
different governance model, and that there's a local board rather than the school district board, but that ultimately they have to follow the public rules around civil rights, around
yeah.
for disabilities, around assessment, and are accountable for delivering on the promises of the charter. And I've seen that as a way where you can get maybe some innovation around school design. Maybe it's serving students who are on the autism spectrum,
Mm,
or creating an arts focused school, or a career and technical education focused school, that kind of thing. that to me is all very different from vouchers, which to
Mm,
me is really a scheme for taking money from public schools and directing it to private institutions, really for the benefit of affluent students.
mm,
When you look at the states that have done large-scale voucher programs, like in Indiana, what you see is really a transfer of dollars away from public schools serving low and middle income kids to private schools that are serving upper middle income and affluent students. Now, that's not how vouchers are sold. Often they're
no, of course
sold
not.
around the single mom whose kid is going
Right.
to a Catholic
Mm.
school in a high needs community, and that's the one shot she feels like she can give her her son,
Mm,
given the challenges in their local district schools.
mhm.
That's the image that's used to sell vouchers, but
Yep.
that's not necessarily how voucher policy actually plays out.
You're right.
And in the case of that mom, I do struggle, like
Yeah.
I remember when I was a principal of a charter in Boston that did very well, that
Mhm.
was a very high performing school. And we would do a lottery, and we, would have this very long wait list. And on the lottery night, you basically pull names out of a hat, and
Yeah.
you keep pulling, to create the wait list in order. And I remember one mom waited till the end,
Mm,
and she was, there was no chance her kid
mm,
was going to get in off the wait list. They were at the very bottom of the wait list. But she waited till the end. She was literally, I think, the last person called. And she said to me, what else can I do?
mm,
And she described that she knew the district school that her son was assigned to. It was a struggling school. It was very chaotic. She knew there was a set of young men at that school, boys at that school,
mm,
who were going to beat up her son. And she knew that they had bullied him, and that was what was going to happen at the school.
mm.
And she wanted something else. And that conversation was heartbreaking to me, because there was nothing.
True.
I really couldn't offer her something. I
Mhm.
encouraged her to talk to the principal of the school and to talk with the district office and so forth, but I couldn't offer her an alternative. And I think about her when the voucher thing comes up, because I'm completely certain from a public policy standpoint that vouchers are a terrible idea.
Mm,
And I think the evidence bears that out. They do not make a positive academic difference. They
Yeah.
are, a redistribution of resources away from the students who need them. And I think about that mom, and that is a part of the policy that I just struggle with. I get
Mhm.
why people are attracted to the voucher idea, because how can you not want to help that mom? But at the end of the day, from a public policy standpoint, I think vouchers are a mirage.
Mm, mm.
Yep. That was at Roxbury Prep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I want to go back to that region for a minute.
Yeah.
Not quite Boston, but let's go to Cambridge. So a lot of people go to college and they decide it is a time to party. You instead chose to focus on service, working at the Phillips Brooks House. What put that into you? What made you want to devote that time in college to service, and then moving forward into those leadership, like at Roxbury Prep?
Yeah. I when I first got to Harvard, I had, some real imposter syndrome. Like I had to write 2 essays for
Wow.
the application process. I had to write the regular essay and the "Why'd you get kicked out?" essay, right? And I felt very lucky that even after getting kicked out, having made those mistakes, that I got a second chance from teachers and a counselor, and then that Harvard accepted me. But I also felt a lot of pressure, like, is somebody going to tap me on the shoulder and say, "Oh, we found that other essay, and we made a mistake. You don't belong."
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
So it's really, when I first got there, just I'm struggling to figure out, where's my place, where are my people. And I went to open house for the Phillips Brooks House, the public service organization. And there was a table about teaching civics in local schools as like an enrichment program.
Hmm.
And I was interested in politics and government. And I thought, oh, this would be cool to go into a school and work with kids around civics. Let me check this out. And so I started volunteering in that way, just teaching civics, and that grew into teaching conflict resolution in schools and in Boston and Cambridge. And I really loved it. And then I got involved in running a summer camp in a public housing development in Boston, really difficult setting. Community had a lot of challenges. It was at the time, it was the largest open air crack market in New England.
Wow.
Serious crime and drug challenges in that community, but amazing kids and families. And I
Yeah.
started running this summer camp where the Harvard undergraduates would actually live in the public housing development for the summer. We had an arrangement with the housing authority to get to apartments, and we would run this program for the summer. And I so loved trying to do for other kids what teachers had done for me, and kind of fell in love with it. And I ended up spending certainly way more time in Roxbury, the African American section of Boston, way more time in Roxbury than I was spending on my classes in Cambridge. You know, I really,
Of course.
house
Yeah.
was the core of my undergraduate education.
Yeah.
You know, I enjoyed my classes, and I started to figure out how do I take classes that kind of connect with
Sure.
education and public service. But it really shaped my whole life, and I decided to be a teacher because of those experiences. And I came back to teach and then to be a principal in that same community.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. What I think that is the kind of like that odyssey that kind of shapes us. Like we sometimes we need to put ourselves in situations that are uncomfortable in order to grow with empathy. And I think,
Yes.
you know, just something that you mentioned, you know, earlier on about the importance of leadership empathy. You know, I think that being able to share a lived experience with, you know, the constituents that we're trying to serve goes a long way. And you know, we're going to touch a little bit. I know our time's kind of wrapping up a little bit, but like that's one of the things that I wish that our leaders understood is being able to, you know, it's like, how can we ask leaders to advocate for public education when they've never been in public schools?
Right.
Or we don't send our own kids to public schools. And so so what you chose to do in making the most out of an experience like Harvard is to serve. And I think that helped lead you to a situation where you could be the Secretary of Education. I wish you were longer though, John. I got to be honest with you, man. I was really excited about having you on. You know, you weren't there for a long time. We had Secretary Arne Duncan on our show. He was a delight, man.
Arne's great, and I was his deputy, and I think
the best.
And he came more through the nonprofit world in leadership in Chicago.
Yes.
Yeah. So like if you had that magic wand, you know, did you do everything that you had the time to do? Or if you had that magic wand, gosh, I wish if I just had one more day in office, I would have done that, you know? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, one of the challenges for us was that Congress was not very eager to do things with the Obama administration during the second term. But you know, one thing, if there was one federal policy that I wish we could have gotten further on, we had an initiative that was designed to incentivize folks to think about socioeconomic diversity in school. And, you know, when you think about, we just had the anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education.
You sure did. Yesterday.
Right.
We have never, as a country, really fulfilled the vision of Brown. And, you know, you think about it in New York, there are 700 school districts. You go to Long Island, there are some 110, 120 school districts.
Yeah.
And they almost all track lines of race and class. And if you had the ability to say, well, let's let's break that down. Let's create more opportunities for students. In some cases, you could do it through career and tech ed. And, on Long Island, some of the most integrated schools, racially and socioeconomically, are the BOCES programs, because they're career and tech ed programs that draw from multiple districts. Other places you have arts programs that are drawing students from multiple districts. Even within districts, you sometimes have intense segregation.
Absolutely.
Up in Brooklyn, you can go 10 blocks and have two schools that are racially and socioeconomically totally different from each other, 10
Crazy.
blocks away. And that's by design. And so even small things like saying, we're going to take, instead of two segregated, racially and socioeconomically segregated K-5 schools, we're going to do a K2 and a 3-5, so that those students have exposure to kids who are different from them, so that we aren't concentrating the students with the most difficult home situations in a subset of schools. And so we had a grant program that we'd launched that was designed to get districts to apply for some funding to build intentionally diverse schools. Was one of the first things that Betsy DeVos canceled. A ton of interest from around the country. She just canceled it.
And there it went.
Yeah, and so I just wish we'd had time to get further on that, because I do think the country, and we see it now, is so divided in so many ways. And if we could have young people having experiences earlier with folks who are different from them, I think that would help us break down some of that.
I agree so much. Empathy, goes back, is being able to understand the folks that we're trying to serve, our constituents.
This is a great time of year for a lot of young people. From what I understand, you may have had a graduation in your family. Is that correct?
Yeah. My older daughter just graduated from NYU at Yankee Stadium. She's very cool.
I know, right?
Yeah, graduation there. And she graduated from the Tisch School. She's an actress, and she's about to embark on this, next stage of her artistic journey. And we're very excited about it, really proud of her.
Well, congratulations to her. In your book, you also reference, you mentioned, besides your children, the best graduations are those that occur in a pretty unique place. Do you want to share what that place is and why you singled those graduations out as being so special to you?
Yeah, I love doing graduations in prisons because you really see the transformative power of education. The one thing we worked on in the Obama administration I'm really proud of is trying to get access to Pell Grants restored for folks who are incarcerated. In the 94 crime bill, one of the many ill-advised, dumb policies that were incorporated in that bill was to take access to Pell Grants away for folks who are incarcerated, to make it harder for them to pursue higher education, which makes no sense. 95% of the people who are incarcerated are coming home. Everybody's interest for them to come home with more skills and with the experience of quality education. So we started a pilot program in the Obama administration to allow Pell Grants to be used for incarcerated students. And then after the Obama administration, I worked at leading a civil rights organization. We were part of a coalition that helped change the law. So now Pell Grant access has been restored, and SUNY is actually the largest provider of higher education in prison in the country, in the state. We've got about over 1,000 students participating.
That's awesome.
And those graduations are so powerful because for so many of the folks, things happen in their lives that made it impossible for them to have quality educational experiences. Some of it tied to poverty, tied to trauma in their homes, tied to choices that they made. But for whatever reason, they didn't have that. But to have that experience while incarcerated, to have the self-discovery, the work that they do, sometimes in their classes, sociology, philosophy, where they're sort of grappling with the choices they've made, the future they want to have. And then at the graduation, to see their sense that they have been transformed, but then also the reaction of their partners, their parents, their kids, to seeing them in this different light. I remember one guy, and I write about this in the book, who I met at Sing Sing, who now works for us at SUNY, leading our education and prison work. He said, this is the first time I've had moral and academic credibility with my
Powerful.
right. And so that those graduations they're just a celebration of what education can be. And that folks are going to go home better equipped to be successful economically and socially when they get home, but also that they're changed by the experience of
Yes.
access to education.
Thank you, John.
I think that's so, that to me is inspirational, because once again, like for our leaders, school leaders that listen to this, I want to say that we don't just serve students, we serve communities, right?
Yeah.
And as educators, I don't think we should be relegated to a zip code. I think that when we get into this profession of education, we are educating every kid, every family, and we may be doing it through our own hemisphere of interest, but we don't just advocate for the kids in our classroom. We advocate for kids in all classrooms.
Yeah.
All right, we are going to go to probably the hardest questions of the day as we're wrapping up our time. We're going to do a lightning round, and I just want to see, how that brain works, John. So we're gonna ask you some questions, and just pick one. You can choose to give. It's a lightning round, so we're gonna ask you, a whole bunch of quick questions. You can choose to give an explanation, or you could just let it sit and just let us think about it. All right.
Yeah.
But we're gonna double down on Boogie Down Brooklyn. Okay, not the Boogie Down Bronx, but Brooklyn. All right. So here we go. All right, Brooklyn Nine-Nine or The Wire. Which show?
Brooklyn Nine-Nine, because we watched that as a family and we really enjoyed that show. The Wire, I think, is probably the more highbrow, Emmy kind of show, but we really enjoyed Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Oh, I love
That
it.
one's
I
more
love
fun for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Favorite Tom Hanks movie?
Now this is gonna surprise you.
All right.
The Man with One Red Shoe.
It's an oldie but goodie.
That is correct. That was a surprise.
That was a big surprise. Now, if you would have said Joe versus the volcano, I would have been like, all right, I got you. Man, the
Of
man with one red shoe.
that show, growing up at a time when, like I didn't have videos, we didn't have cable, but The Man with One Red Shoe, for some reason it was like a show that ran on the weekend.
Yeah.
Just regular.
That's a good one.
Multiple times, and I thought it was so funny, and Tom Hanks.
I'm gonna watch that tonight.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's an old movie, but it's a good one.
All right, this one's a little cerebral. You get to pick 4 educators to be on John B. King Jr.'s Mount Rushmore. Who would those educators be?
That is tough. W.E.B. Du Bois. Just such an important figure in sort of African American history, and just appreciating what the study of African American history could mean. Maria Montessori.
That's a good pull.
My girls had such a good experience early on in Montessori school. Jaime Escalante.
Stand and Deliver.
Stand and Deliver.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just love that movie.
It's a great movie.
There's a scene where they're in like the teachers, they're in like a teacher meeting, and the principal is lamenting that the school is struggling. And he says at one point to this group of teachers, who amongst us could do more? And Jaime Escalante, Edward James almost raises his hand and says, I could do more. I could do more. And that moment of like, we can't just say like, because the community is struggling, because kids are facing a lot of challenges, that like, we're going to throw in the towel. Like, we got to keep trying to find ways to help kids. So powerful.
It's awesome. He says, you got to have ganas. You got to have desire.
Yes,
right?
That's right.
You got to have ganas.
Right, that's right. It's a classic movie. And then this is a less nationally known person, but Lorraine Monroe
Mm.
All right.
started a school, Frederick Douglass Academy in New York City, and she was just a model of kind of an excellent African American educator who built a school on the premise that you would have structure with love.
Mm.
She was just a real mentor to me and some other folks who I knew who were starting schools in the early days of charters. She had been a district principal, it wasn't a charter school, but she got flexibility to create her own school model, and she just was so intentional about systems, sure that kids were getting what they needed.
That's a pretty good Mount Rushmore, John. That's a pretty good one. That's a pretty
John,
good one.
I'm gonna ask you one more question. I know our time is getting to the end. First, people can read your new book again, Teacher by Teacher by John King Jr. It is a phenomenal read. John, what words of inspiration do you have for our nation of educators?
You know, I'll tell you a quick story. You know, my father, I mentioned, was very sick when I was a kid, and I never got to really experience a connection to his career. You know, he was this very accomplished educator, but I didn't. The version of my father that I got was a reflection of the Alzheimer's that he was struggling. But when he passed, at his wake, guy came up to me. He was probably in his late 50s, maybe 60s. He'd been my father's student, and he hadn't seen him in decades. But he saw the announcement, you know, the obituary in the newspaper, and he wanted to come to the wake because he wanted to tell me the impact that my father had had on him. That this example of Black excellence, his high expectations, his coupling of those high expectations with support had made a huge impact on him. So much so that decades later, he wanted to be able to just thank his family for what he had meant. That was such an important moment for me as a kid to be able to connect with that part of my father's life. But I think about that sometimes when you're in the classroom and stuff is hard. And, you know, as we talked about, first year teaching especially is really hard.
Yep.
When you are seeing public education under assault the way it is, every time you open the newspaper, it's so important to realize that you are transforming lives every day. And you may not see it, you may not know it. Mr. Osterwald didn't know what I was going through at home. But years later, know that you are making this difference and that people's lives will be better because of what you poured into them in your 3rd grade classroom, in your 7th grade science classroom, in your 11th grade social studies class. You are changing lives. And I'm just grateful to the folks who wake up every morning to do that.
Wow. Awesome. John B. King Jr. Excellence, equity, empathy, and education. I absolutely love it. John, thank you so much thank you for your time spending this with us. Dr. Worcester, I'm flabbergasted, my friend. I mean, it's just great that you would spend the time with these two bozos, John. I really appreciate that, man. So hang back just a little bit, and we'll get you out of here. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It was so fun.